Will you please pray with me? Open our ears, Lord God, to hear your word and know your voice. Speak to our hearts and strengthen our wills, that we may serve you now and always. Amen. As Pastor Matt said, Pastor Sarah and Jeff are not here this morning because they left on an early flight for Haiti, along with 12 members of the congregation. So I'm going to take this opportunity while she's away to tell a story on Pastor Sarah. But rest assured that she does know what I'm talking about, and I'm not talking behind her back. So shortly after she joined the staff last year, Sarah volunteered to lead the centering moment at our Wednesday afternoon staff meeting. At that meeting, she strongly suggested that we should take off our shoes and our socks and stand away from the table in a circle so that we could look at our feet, our bare feet. Some of us had socks that didn't match, but worse than that, some of us had dirty toenails and calluses and gnarly toes. So most of us reacted like Peter. You're not going to wash my feet. It was a pretty intense moment. And when we all got it, we got it right then and there, that Sarah was going to push us beyond our limits, and maybe more than once. But Sarah didn't wash our feet that day. She just wanted us to be aware of them. Aware of those relatively small parts of our anatomy that touch the earth and around us. She asked us to be grateful for our feet, for all they do for us, for holding us up and giving us the ability to go where we want to go. Most of us were, I think, pretty relieved that day that nobody touched our feet, and that we were able to pretty quickly put those vulnerable parts of ourselves back into hiding. But it wasn't so for Jesus' disciples. As they sat at the table together to eat their last meal as a group, Jesus' eyes moved to their feet. And theirs were definitely dirty feet, dusty feet, calloused, rough feet. Yet he was drawn to them. And Jesus got up from the table and began to remove his outer robe. He took an apron from the surprised servant who was waiting for his cue, and he tied that apron around his waist. And then he also took the basin away from the servant. By this time, no one dared to breathe as they watched Jesus pour the water and set the bowl beside the first person. We don't know which of the disciples was the first for him to wash, but we do know that he got down on his knees and one foot at a time, he carefully washed those feet and dried them. And as he passed from one person to the next, he thought about each of them and how he had gotten to know them these past 3 years. He knew their fears and their vulnerabilities. He knew their strengths and their gifts. But he kept all of this to himself. He didn't say a word out loud. Moving in silence from one to the next, he sponged from their feet the dust that had collected on their travels together. And that dirt collected in the bottom of the bowl, making the water appear more muddy and dark. The room was silent. No one spoke until he came to Peter. And then Peter's words were startling. You're not going to wash my feet. Not ever. Well, Peter had no filter, we know that. He was known to say what was right there on top of his mind. And in that outburst, he probably expressed for all of them what they had been thinking. But for you, imagine Jesus down on the floor in front of you, your feet bare, all the veins and calluses and funky toenails exposed. What would you be thinking? It's not that it was too intimate for the disciples. It's that he was their teacher, their leader. Only servants wash feet. Teachers didn't. Leaders didn't. God sure didn't. The whole structure under which they had operated was right in front of them, breaking down. But for Jesus, that was exactly the point. The point which they never really quite appreciated. This breaking down and upending of everything they expected was the only way they were going to get the message that Jesus had been trying to give them. They thought it was charming when he spoke in intimate terms of God, calling him Abba, which some translate as Daddy. They believed that he was a holy man, but they really only grasped his humanity. Jesus had told them that he was the one who had come to take away all the dirt and sin and death that clung so close to them. But most of them clung to their ideas of what God's unfolding kingdom would look like. And their vision didn't feature this upside-down realm that Jesus was right in front of them inaugurating. They had always expected Jesus to get stronger, not weaker, to appear more godlike, not more common. None of them expected Jesus to take on the role of a servant. It would only occur to them when they were tearing through the scriptures again after his death and after his resurrection appearances that Jesus had in fact given them the answers they were seeking. After Jesus was gone from them, having died like a criminal between two thieves, the light would eventually dawn on the disciples. Jesus was exactly who he said he would be, a servant whom God had anointed to show them how to live. Thinking back, they remembered what he said that evening before they ate that last meal and before he washed their feet. He had said, I have laid down a pattern for you. It was a pattern that would shape their lives in the days and years to come. But at that moment, it had melted Peter's defenses completely when Jesus locked eyes with him and told him, Peter, unless I wash you, you will have no part in me or my ministry. I'm not sure Peter got it then, but later he must have realized that God needed all of him, not just his strength, in order to work through him. I want you to hear that again. God needed Peter's weakness in order to work through him. And Peter, like all of us, would find fulfillment in this pattern, this Christ pattern of giving and receiving care. That's the pattern Jesus gave him, and it's the pattern Jesus gives us. A pattern that answers the question, what brings fulfillment? We come to church to find direction and meaning for our lives, to find what brings fulfillment. Well, here we have it. Here's the answer. Jesus says, I've laid down a pattern for you. What I've done, you do. It's both simple and hard. Love one another as I've loved you. Love not from a distance, but up close, holding the most vulnerable stuff, the dusty, dirty, gnarly parts of us that can prevent us from moving where we want to go if we're not willing to let go of it, and that which we are embarrassed to show. Jesus calls us to wash and care for those parts of ourselves and our neighbors as if they were the most precious things there are. In washing the feet of the disciples, Jesus was empowering them with instructions for life, a life of fulfillment. And so he said, "What I've done, you do." They would find their fulfillment in giving and receiving care as they had seen Jesus do, beginning with feet. In those last days, Jesus also allowed a woman to come in and anoint his feet with oil and dry them with her hair. So, as followers of Jesus, we'll find our fulfillment in the pattern Jesus laid down for us. But we don't have to wash feet or allow our feet to be washed, although we may, if we wish. This year, on Maundy, Thursday, Pastor Sarah is going to push us a little further. She is going to offer foot washing, and you may come before the Maundy, Thursday mindfulness meal and have your feet washed. Because washing feet is a symbol and a sign of our participation in the pattern of Christ-shaped care. We'll find fulfillment in using our gifts to love and serve others. This is one of the lines in the statement of faith that we say every week and that we will repeat later in the liturgy for the reception of new members. And it's a line that was echoing in my mind when I took the Stephen Ministry Leader training last month. As I sat there and listened to what they had created and what we were going to bring home, it was clear to me that this new ministry will offer another essential avenue for us to follow, that pattern that was laid down for us by Jesus. It will teach us to care as Jesus did, quietly, confidentially, tenderly, patiently. It will extend our ability to offer Christ's love to one another. With Stephen Ministry, it won't be just the pastors who reach out to those who are hurting. In addition, individuals like you, who have been trained to keep confidences and listen without judging or fixing, will be matched up with others who have had their worlds turned upside down. And what do I mean by that? I mean, even the birth of an infant, something you're looking forward to, can turn your world upside down. So can the death of a loved one. So can the loss of a job that you loved and thought you'd have until you were ready to retire. But Stephen Ministry won't fulfill on its promise to help us give this Christ pattern care, no matter how many people take the training, unless we also allow ourselves to be receivers of that care. And that can be the hardest part for those of us who've been told all our lives that it is better to give than to receive. So many of us are like Peter. We want to be seen as givers. We don't want anyone to give to us. We're strong. We don't need anything from anyone else. We see that as a weakness. And it's a weakness I know very well. Even before I went to seminary, I was so into being the one who is the giver that 20 years ago when I had major surgery for breast cancer, I didn't even think of asking anyone to help me or to care for me. I came home from the hospital to my then young children and tried to keep up with the housework, the play dates, supervising their homework and doing my job with my husband. But one day when our 80-pound Doberman Pinscher had run away and gotten hit by a car and needed to be taken to the vet, and some kids were back in my house ransacking it, I collapsed in a pool of tears on the sidewalk. It was only then that I let my church family know that I was at the end of my rope. And they stepped in, and they followed the pattern. And in so doing, I found myself caught up in the pattern as well. They offered help with the housework and the children, and someone even came over and massaged my painful arm. And I let them. I had to come face to face with my own inadequacy and be willing to admit it. And that was a vulnerable place for me, because I've always wanted to appear strong for my children, for my husband, for my father at that time who was still grieving the death of my mother, for my church where I was a member of the church council. But I had to be vulnerable enough to let God take care of the dust and dirt of my life through the people God had called to journey with me. And I had to learn that God needed all of me, not just my strength, in order to work through me. God needs all of you, not just your strength, in order to work through you too. Like Peter, all of us can find fulfillment in giving and receiving this Christ-shaped care. Can you do it? I think so. I know so. Let yourself be weak, so that Christ's love can be strong. Let yourselves be weak so that our church can grow stronger, and together we'll find fulfillment. Hallelujah.